Well, we are very happy to have you, and I wanted to just briefly introduce you. So I think you know we have, I'm sorry you can't see them. Okay,
There
well,
you are. Hi.
all right. So I'm Lena Hill. So welcome to English at Work, and these students are mostly juniors and freshmen, but we do have some sophomores as well, and they are interested, all English majors interested in thinking about what to do with their English degree. So we're very excited. You are our first alumna to join, and we're hoping that you can talk about yourself as an author of the Scholar in the Sphinx series, as well as your work in university publishing. Is it for Brunel? How do you pronounce it? Is it Brunel University?
That's correct, Brunel.
Okay. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about your path from graduating from the University of Iowa to occupying the positions you have now. Any interesting or important steps along the way that might be useful for them to think about would be really helpful, and then we'll just kind of go from there.
Absolutely, I would love to. Okay, well, first of all, hi, I'm really glad to talk to you today. I'm glad that we have this technology so we can. Alison Reeger-Cook, actually go by the pen name A.R. Cook, and I am the author of, it's a young adult fantasy historical fiction series called The Scholar and the Sphinx. These are the first two books. There'll be a third one out early next year. And I attended Iowa from 2001 to 2004, actually graduated a little bit early. And I originally attended Iowa for playwriting. I thought that was going to be my writing focus. But some changes came up in life that kind of changed that path. After I graduated, I was actually went back to Riverside, Illinois. That's actually my hometown. I was there for about 2 years. And in the time I was just writing on the side, I was actually working at a moving company for a couple of years in their billing department. But the nice thing about that is I still had my evenings. I could certainly still write. But then we moved down to Gainesville, Georgia, my husband and I, and that's actually where I'm calling from, right? And for a while when I moved here, I was doing what jobs were available. I worked in a call center. I worked at a therapy clinic for a little while. I actually eventually worked at a children's book publishing company after a couple of years. They do children's picture books. They're called Peachtree Publishers. They put out great books. And that was certainly interesting and educational for a writer to really see the publishing side of everything. I was actually their conference coordinator, totally different from, but to see everything that goes behind the scenes, the editing, the putting a book together, the thousands of submissions, because Peachtree takes unsolicited submissions. So the submission pile, you go into the back room, there's literally thousands back there. So it's fun to go through all of those. And there were actually some good submissions. But then after a while, I found out that Brunel University had a position in their publications department. And the main determining factor for that was, did I want to keep driving 2 hours into Atlanta to work at Peachtree Publishers or take a 5-minute walk down the street to work at Brunel? So it kind of became a pretty easy choice at that point. As much as I love Peachtree, you can't beat the commute from here to Brunel. In 2003, I actually published my first book. Although actually, before I forget, University of Iowa helped me with my very first publication, official publication. It was a 10-minute play. It was part of the 10-minute play festival that the theater department has every year. And it's available through Hewer Publishing. The university actually submitted it, and so that's my first official publication. I cannot forget that. While at Iowa, I actually had lots of, I'm sorry if I'm breaking up a little bit here, had lots of chances to actually, I think I had 6 during my undergraduate time there. There was 6 short plays, which I think for an undergrad actually is a lot. So then the playwriting changed to novel writing when I came down to Georgia, just because back in Illinois, I was much more part of a theatrical community. Once I got down here, I was, for a while kind of alone. It was just me and my husband. I didn't know anybody. And novel writing is more of a solitary activity, so it switched to that. To get published was a long journey because there's lots of different avenues you can go. But the one I really wanted to try to get traditionally published first. I just want to see if that was something. So I pitched one book for years that never got picked up. I think I pitched that one a good 100 times. Nobody was interested. And then I started pitching. I pitched it about 65 times, I think, according to the list I kept. But that right about that time, right after pitch number 65, I was a historical fiction, historical romance publisher called Knox Robinson Publishing. They were a couple years old, and they were looking for new work. And I thought, well, I do young adult fantasy. There's some historical fiction in there. It's not quite the right fit. But what have I got to this camp? Any different? A couple weeks later, they said, oh, the first 3 chapters were interesting. Can we see the rest? And I thought, okay, I've been at this stage before where somebody said, oh, that sounds interesting. Can we see more? So I sent it in. And a short while after that, they contacted me again and said, we'd love to offer you a contract for Scholar and the Sphinx. And at the time, I was actually alone when I saw this, so nobody heard my screams of joy when this happened, unfortunately. But that's how it got started, and it's been a very interesting journey ever since. So I've just kept working on that for now. And like I said, I do write in the evenings and in my free time, but I'm also writing during the day at Brunel University since I'm in their publications department. They do press releases, school events, things like that. So I'm kind of constantly writing, which it's good to stay in that vein to keep writing. So I know I just talked for a whole lot just now, so I hope that was informative.
Great.
Oh, that was great. That was just what we wanted to hear. I wonder, and I just want to open it up to the students and maybe ask them if they have any questions before I go on talking. I have tons of questions, but do y'all have anything you want to ask or follow up on? Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting, like your publishing history as well as like you being an author. So I'm wondering if like you going through that publishing process, like working at a publisher, does that affect how you kind of create your stories or like how you write your stories?
I'm sorry, it was a little garbled. It was how do I write my stories and what's the process?
We're still working out the kinks.
Okay. So
It might be kind of bad too.
can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you better now. Yes.
Okay. So I'm wondering what going through the publishing process, working at a publishing company, does that affect how you write your stories as an author?
Oh, I see. Now, since I worked at Peachtree Publishers, does that affect how I write?
Does it affect like how you create your stories?
Is that what you mean?
Do you have to like write your stories in a certain way because you know it's going to get published that way? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think this kind of boils down to the whole, now that I've seen what publishers want to find versus what I prefer to write, that kind of thing, like what they want versus what you want to write.
Yeah, that's
Right, yeah, right. That's my question. Like, what's the relationship between the two is my question.
It's a really complicated relationship, I will say that, because this is the thing that all writers run into eventually is you go into a bookstore and say, oh, that's the big popular book right now, I should be writing that or something like that, versus what you may really want to write, but it may not be what's popular right now. I'd say I've thought about that. I was very tempted for a while, you know, when like the Hunger Games came out and Harry Potter, it's like I should be writing about young kids facing corrupt systems or doing magic. But I don't enjoy writing things that I don't innately want to write. And I think that shows in your writing if you're trying to mimic somebody or somebody else's writing in the hopes that'll be a better sale or better pitch versus what you want to do. And honestly, if you write what you want to write and you write it well, you'll find an audience for it. So I'd say focus more on what you want to write and rewrite and just polish it to perfection, and you'll find the person, the publisher, or the audience you're looking for.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Welcome.
If you have a question, just if you could share your name just so she'll know who she's talking to.
I think we have to speak slowly because if she breaks up at the other end, she won't hear the whole question.
Yeah, and if I'm talking too fast, let me know, because I might be breaking up too and not know it.
Well, I wondered, did you, I'm sorry, did you meet Kate Tornos? I know she's the one who did all this, and I don't
No,
think
it's
she
okay.
was running
We
around.
kinda
I just
did.
want you to meet her.
I thought that might be Kate. I'm sorry I didn't even introduce myself to you before. I'm sorry.
Apologies for not doing that. So I'm wondering, so you gave us a great picture of your path from the University of Iowa, these years of sort of going from Illinois to Georgia and figuring out your space. But were there specific skills that you acquired as an undergraduate in English classes that you feel have been important to your success, either as a creative writer or working in publications?
Oh, absolutely. Even though my focus was playwriting, obviously all my English courses had me reading all the time. I took creative writing courses, and that's really where you need to start. I mean, if you don't read a lot, there's no way you can write effectively. And you have to read all kinds of things, not just the type of genre you want to write. I mean, I took Gothic horror novel writing classes. I don't write horror, but I certainly learned a lot from reading that type of novel. Women's works. I mean, it was all over the place, and all of it was valuable. So absolutely, my English courses, and like I said, my first publication was through Iowa, so I owe Iowa a lot to the kind of writer I am.
Thank you.
Now, you worked with a relatively new publishing house to get your book published. Ultimately, that was who picked it up. Do you recommend that when people are having trouble finding a home for their book? Is it better to look for maybe new and upstarting publishers because they might take a risk on you or a chance on you?
That's a really good question, because the publishing waters, no matter which avenue you go, they're treacherous waters. I know everyone wishes that they could get in with the big top five. It's Random House, Penguin, Simon & Schuster, the others. But that, if you're aiming for that, it's not impossible. That's just going to be a long, arduous road because, A, they don't take unsolicited submissions. You will need an agent. So, and that's tricky in itself. That's just like pitching to publishers. You'll have to pitch and pitch and pitch. Small presses are willing to take in more new writers because they want to get off the ground. They want to give them that chance. But you really have to do your research then, because there are small presses out there who, they want to churn out books and keep the 80% of the royalties while the author gets 8%. I mean, that's standard. An author tends to get 8 to 10% of the royalties because the publisher is the one printing all the books, getting the cover art, doing all of the logistics and nitty-gritty. And then there's always self-publishing, which has definitely changed in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, if you self-publish, no one would take you seriously. But nowadays, it's just as effective and just as, I'd say, getting as respected as traditional publishing in certain venues. And of course, you keep more royalties that way, but it's called self-publishing. Everything you do is your own work. All the marketing, cover art, getting it in the hands of reviewers. I mean, they're the publisher. You have to do all the work. So either way, it's just tons of research to find out which way you want to go and what would be the most effective for your book. Okay, there's the sound. I thought I lost it for a minute. Okay.
Hi, Allison. I'm Max. My question has to do with your writing process on a day-to-day level. How much time do you spend editing? How much time do you spend writing? Is it every day? And I know you also are working with the publisher, so I was just kind of curious, I think, about the balance between writing and working.
It can get tricky. I know most writers will say you should try to write every day if you can, even if it's just a couple sentences. And I strive to do that, but there are times you get home after a day of work and you're so exhausted, or there's an evening engagement, because there's family, there's errands, there's life. So I would just say if you can set a goal for yourself per week, it's pretty good. Or if you keep a diary and just write a little bit is good. But, some people don't write every day. They write every couple days. The important thing is just to keep writing one way or another. Like I said, at work, fortunately, I am writing there, but I'm staring at a screen all day, so I come home, it's like, I don't want to stare at a screen anymore right now. So it's just making sure you do set time to do that. In terms of editing, I am glad that my publisher helps me with that. I am probably my own worst editor because, probably as you might know, for those of you who like to write, you feel like taking the red marker of death to your work is kind of like asking you to cut the fingers off your baby. It is your baby. You don't want to trim anything. But eventually you have to, because succinct tends to be better. In fact, it was really interesting. I just did an assignment where I was supposed to tell a story in 4 pages. It was actually for a comic book. So it was telling a comic story in 20 panels, which doesn't seem like a lot to tell a beginning, middle, and end. But that was a really interesting exercise because it taught you do have to cut stuff out. You do have to take the red marker of death to it eventually to fit those parameters. So it's important to learn to edit yourself, even though that's probably the hardest thing you'll end up doing to your own work.
All the students took what's called a strong interest inventory test to sort of help them figure out, what they really are interested in. You seem to have a really good sense of balancing your work commitments, your creative commitments with personal life, so that everything. So you said Peachtree Publishing was really fun, but it was 2 hours away, or even early in your career where you said it was okay working during the day, something that wasn't creative because it gave you your evenings. How have you managed to maintain that balance, that life-work balance as a creative writer?
Well, it can really depend on what's going on at the time. Like I said, part of getting that 4 hours back in my day from not making that 2-hour drive was really helpful for the writing. But it's a struggle because, like I say, things can pop up in your schedule. You planned, tonight I'm going to write at least for an hour. And then all of a sudden you find out, oh, it's your niece's birthday party. You don't have this evening. So it's just adapting when you can. I know some writers who already know they have no evenings, that they're going to come home and their evening's booked. They'll get up in the morning an hour earlier than they used to. So they'll get up at 5 or 6 in the morning to make time for writing. You just have to adapt with what your current schedule is, what could come up in the way. And like I say, you don't have to write every day. Just find a way when you can to make time.
I know you're living in Georgia, right? A lot of my students who are going to be writers often feel they need to go to New York City, or they need to be somewhere that's considered Boston, the literary hubs. What's your perspective on, would it be easier to get published if you're networking with people and you're living in that city? Or nowadays, is it okay to live other places because it's all electronic? Or what's your situation on that?
Well, I've never lived in New York, so I really can't give the perspective of if it is easier to find a literary community to get in touch with in the big literary hubs. But because so much of everything is electronic nowadays, that I don't think it's necessary. At least, obviously, the writing part you can do anywhere. And there are always opportunities. Say, I live near Atlanta, so there are occasionally writers' conferences here. And agents from New York come here to try to find authors and people interested in the business. I mean, it can happen pretty much anywhere. I think there's writing conferences most places. I know next month is NaNoWriMo, which is where, depending on where you live, there's usually group meetups for writers who want to write a novel for the month. I don't know if folks are familiar with NaNoWriMo. If you're not, I encourage you to do it. It's a lot of fun.
For that on the 25th. So we are having an event for that to kick that off.
Awesome. Good for you. Yeah, so see, there's ways of getting together with other writers. You don't have to go to New York or any of the big places, especially because if you say you want to go the traditional publishing route and get an agent, most of them take electronic submissions now. Most of them won't take hard copy submissions anymore because the pile would stack up so high they'd have no space in their office. So because there's so much going on digitally, I don't think it's necessary to go to New York necessarily.
I also wondered what your day is like in an academic publication space. Like, what are the responsibilities? When you get there, what are you doing?
That was definitely a world apart from working, say, at a book publisher. Because, say, here it is more, we put out a magazine, just like Iowa does, Burnell puts out a magazine. So that's a lot of gathering information. It's much more journalistic, I would say, because you're going out to talk to other alumni about their stories, what they're doing now, events that are coming up at the university, talking to teachers. So it definitely, say if you want to take a journalistic route, working for a university, magazine, or newspaper is definitely a good way to start. But it's just as fun. It's just a very different mode of writing, but I enjoy interviewing people and then bringing it back and typing up an article or putting out a press release. You get to learn how to distribute things through, actually we use a thing called Hometown Merit, which is designed specifically for colleges. It's actually very cool because it allows you to post press releases about individual students' accomplishments, and it sends them automatically to hometown newspapers, to local media outlets, to high schools. So I've learned a lot doing it, and just finding all this new technology available in that spectrum is really wonderful.
If our students wanted to get started at a place like Peachtree Publishing, and they want to start the entry-level job there, or if they wanted to start in a job such as the one you're in now, what should they be doing now? You know, what skills do they need to be building, or what internship or experiences would they need to get to be a decent applicant for either of those jobs you had, or lower level?
It's interesting because, well, actually, I'll give you more of my husband's experience because he's actually going back to college right now. And he wanted to go, well, he is a mass communications major. So part of his requirement, he wants to go into videography, he had to take an internship. So that's definitely the way he started, with an internship at a local media station, and after 6 months, they liked him so much they actually hired him. So he's working there part-time and still going to school. In my case with Peachtree Publishers, it was a matter of they were first looking for an administrative assistant. That's actually where I started before I became a conference coordinator. So I think it's important just to develop a wide variety of skills. I mean, certainly keep up with the writing, try to, like say, if you can do a school newspaper or magazine, that shows your writing chops, that's a good way to start. But also, if you learn clerical skills or other skills that might be helpful to a publishing company that will then seg into the job that you want once you get to know them, that's a place to start too.
I think we've heard that from a few other alum, that they often started as sort of administrative assistants or something like that, and then they worked into, you know, editing or whatever work they want to do. We only have a few more minutes. Anything else, you guys? They're thinking.
No pressure. No pressure.
I see you're also pretty active blogging, and I know that's a sort of new aspect of, even as an established creative writer. Do you find that keeping a blog is important to maintaining your fan base?
It is. I honestly should probably blog and use social media more than I do, because that is probably the #1 way right now to reach out to readers, to get them to find you. You can certainly go to bookstores and do book signings. I do go to conventions. Since my books are fantasy oriented, I do fantasy conventions in the area. But that takes time, and that takes some money out of your pocket to be able to get a table. So social media is the fastest way, and of course the least expensive way to get out the word to readers and to find other authors who can help you. I know there's one story of a author who is struggling to get noticed. She noticed that a literary agent had posted something on Twitter about, like, write the best opening line for this scenario. So she did. She tweeted it, and I guess it was effective enough that later when she reached out to him to see if he would be her agent, she's like, I remember that tweet you did, that opening line you did, and that actually got them working together. So you just never know. Social media will surprise you. So definitely make time for it if you're going to be a writer.
And I'm curious, do you feel like you need to be loyal to this publisher now that you have a book or two published? You know, is it etiquette that you stay with that same publisher for that whole series, or could you jump to a bigger publisher now that you're out there a little bit, or is that not done?
Oh, it's certainly done. I've met authors who, mainly because they do different types of writing, they could do novels, then they might do, let's say, graphic novels and different short stories. So one publisher may not do all of that. A lot of publishers specialize. And it also depends on if you feel like your publisher is doing what's best for you, too. I'm actually considering trying some self-publishing just to see the difference between the small press publisher and what it's like to self-publish. In that case, I just asked my publisher, I said, hey, just so you know, I'm going to self-publish something. Don't freak out and think I'm abandoning you. And usually they're pretty good about that. But yeah, if you feel like you signed on with the publisher and then they're not meeting your expectations, and of course, as long as it doesn't conflict with any contract that you've signed, you do have to be careful. Read, if they offer you a contract, read it, or have a literary agent read it, just to make sure you're not missing some little tiny fine print that you shouldn't. But ultimately, it's your writing journey, and you should never feel stuck. It's the worst feeling in the world to feel like you made a bad decision and then you can't get out of it. So just mainly protect yourself and protect your writing.
Any last questions, guys? Okay. Yeah.
One short question. Do you have a different royalties percentage for your ebooks versus your paperback? Because I found that sometimes that's the case these days.
Yes, mainly because it doesn't cost. There's no printing cost for an ebook. So in my case, I believe it's 15%. Once again, this is traditional publishing. Publisher keeps most. It's 15% for an ebook versus 8% for a paperback cover, 10% for a hardback cover. If you go self-publishing, you typically keep 100% of the royalties for an ebook, which of course are typically cheaper than a softcover, and then anywhere from 70 to 90% for print books.
Any parting advice for English majors before we go? Otherwise, you've been really helpful.
Well, I'm glad I could be helpful, and mainly just right now, since you're all still studying, I mean, just read, like I said, read a lot. That's important. I know there's writers who just kind of want to jump to the computer and start writing, but you got to read first. As I said, write a lot, however you can make that work. Doesn't have to be every day, but you do keep it up. And, if you start pitching, I guess the number one thing that I do want to tell everyone is rejection. If you will face it, and it's not personal. It's never personal, and you learn from it. Every time I got a rejection letter, I just told myself, well, now this is another reason to keep on going. Because there's still authors who have been in the business a long time and still can't handle rejection very well. So just remember, it's part of being a writer, and you'll overcome it. Just keep chugging along.